1. The Spiritual Rituals. A journey to find the reborn soul. Dare you. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a world where the boundary between the seen and the unseen blurs, where the soul of a great spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, prepares to return in a new form to guide humanity. When the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, leaves this earthly plane, a sacred quest begins, one that is as much about faith as it is about precision, as much about the heart as it is about the cosmos. This is the process of finding the next Dalai Lama, the living embodiment of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism. Let me take you deep into this spiritual journey, where ancient rituals, mystical signs, and the wisdom of lamas converge to locate a soul that carries the weight of centuries. The moment the current Dalai Lama passes, the air will feel heavy with both loss and anticipation. In the monasteries of the Gelug tradition, the sect to which the Dalai Lama belongs, senior lamas will gather, their robes rustling softly as they sit in quiet contemplation. Their task is not a simple one. It's a sacred duty, a communion with the divine, to find the child, or perhaps, as the current Dalai Lama has suggested, an adult who carries the essence of Avalokiteshvara. This is not a bureaucratic process, but a spiritual odyssey, one that begins with signs from the universe itself. The first step is to seek guidance from the divine. The lamas look for omens, subtle messages woven into the fabric of reality. Picture this: the body of the Dalai Lama, laid out with reverence after his passing, might turn in a particular direction, as if pointing toward the place of his rebirth. The smoke from his cremation might rise and drift in an unexpected way, curling toward a distant land, perhaps the Himalayan foothills of India, where the Tibetan diaspora thrives, or a quiet village in Bhutan or Nepal. These are not random occurrences but sacred clues, believed to be orchestrated by the Dalai Lama's consciousness as it prepares to re-enter the world. I find this idea breathtaking, that even in death, a great soul can leave breadcrumbs for the living to follow. One of the most revered sites in this process is Lama Lotso, a sacred lake nestled high in the Tibetan mountains, its waters shimmering like a mirror to the divine. High lamas, often accompanied by the Nichung oracle, Tibet's state oracle, will make a pilgrimage to this lake, their steps slow and deliberate, their minds open to visions. The lake is said to reveal glimpses of the future, a face, a place, a symbol. Imagine standing on its rocky shore, the wind carrying whispers of the past and future, as a lama gazes into the water and sees a fleeting image: a house with a red roof, a child with bright eyes, or a monastery nestled in a valley. These visions are not mere imagination, but sacred messages, guiding the search committee toward the child who holds the Dalai Lama's essence. I can't help but wonder what it would feel like to witness such a moment, to sense the divine speaking. Through the natural world. Once the signs are gathered, the search begins in earnest. The lamas form a committee, often led by figures like the Gangan Tripa, the spiritual head of the Gelug school, or trusted regents appointed by the Dalai Lama himself. They fan out across regions where the Dalai Lama has suggested his reincarnation. Might appear likely outside Chinese-controlled Tibet, in places like India, where he has lived in exile since 1959, or among the 140,000 Tibetans scattered across the globe. The search focuses on young children, typically boys, born around the time of the Dalai Lama's passing, though Tenzin Gyatso has opened the door to the possibility of a female reincarnation, a radical yet compassionate break from tradition. This inclusivity speaks to the heart of his teachings. Compassion knows no boundaries, not even those of gender. The lamas look for children who stand out, who seem to carry a spark of something extraordinary. These children might speak of places they've never been, recall details of a life they couldn't possibly know, or show an unusual affinity for Buddhist rituals. I think of the story of Tenzin Gyatso himself, chosen at age 2 in a remote village in Amdo, Tibet. When lamas visited his home, he recognized objects belonging to the 13th Dalai Lama: a walking stick, a pair of glasses, a drum pointing to them with delight and saying, "It's mine, it's mine." That moment, so simple yet so profound, confirmed his identity as the reincarnation. It's a reminder that the divine can manifest in the smallest gestures. In the innocence of a child's voice, the testing process is meticulous, a blend of intuition and scrutiny. The lamas present the candidates with objects, some belonging to the previous Dalai Lama and others not, to see which child can distinguish the sacred from the mundane. Imagine a small boy, barely able to speak in full sentences, reaching unerringly for a rosary once held by Tenzin Gyatso, his tiny hands grasping it with a certainty that defies explanation. The lamas watch closely, consulting oracles, and each other, their hearts open to the possibility that this child is the one. The Nechong oracle, a revered figure who channels a protective deity, plays a key role, offering guidance through trance-like pronouncements. This interplay of human discernment and divine intervention is what makes the process so unique. It's not just a search, but a dialogue with the cosmos. Once a child is identified, the confirmation process continues. The lamas consult ancient texts, cross-reference the signs, and seek approval from the spiritual community. If the Dalai Lama has left specific instructions, as Tenzin Gyatso has promised to do around his 90th birthday on July 6, 2025, these are followed with reverence. The child is then taken to a monastery, often Draipang or Sira, in the Tibetan exile community in India, to begin a life of rigorous training. Picture a young soul, perhaps only 4 or 5, leaving their family to enter a world of chanting, meditation, and study. They will spend years mastering Buddhist philosophy, memorizing sutras, and learning to embody the compassion of Avalokiteshvara. It's a daunting path, yet one infused with purpose to serve not just Tibetans, but all beings seeking enlightenment. This spiritual process, though ancient, feels alive and urgent today. The rituals are not relics of the past, but living practices, adapted to a world where the Dalai Lama's role extends beyond Tibet to a global audience. As I reflect on this, I'm struck by the balance between tradition and adaptability. The lamas must honor the sacred method's signs, visions, tests while navigating a world where political forces, particularly China's influence, threaten to distort the process. The Dalai Lama's insistence that his reincarnation will occur in a free country, likely India, is a testament to his foresight, ensuring that the spiritual purity of the selection remains untainted. As you imagine this journey, consider the weight of it. A group of lamas, guided by faith, searching for a child who carries the soul of a global icon. It's a process that asks us to believe in something greater than ourselves, to trust in the unseen. For me, it's a reminder of the power of intention, of seeking truth with an open heart. The rituals of Lama Lotso, the oracles, the tests, they're not just about finding the next Dalai Lama, but about affirming the continuity of compassion in a world that so desperately needs it. As we move to the next section, I'll explore how Tenzin Gyatso himself is shaping this process, his voice a beacon in a turbulent world. What do you think it would feel like to witness these rituals firsthand, to stand by that sacred lake and feel the presence of something eternal? *1. The voice of Tenzin Gyatso, shaping the future of the Dalai Lama's legacy. Imagine sitting across from a man who, at 90 years old, carries the wisdom of centuries in his gentle smile and piercing eyes. Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, is not just a spiritual leader, but a living bridge between tradition and the modern world, a figure whose laughter echoes as freely as his teachings on compassion. As I write this on July 6, 2025, his 90th birthday, I'm struck by the clarity and courage with which he's addressing the question of his succession. The process of choosing the next Dalai Lama isn't just a matter of rituals. It's a battle for the soul of Tibetan Buddhism. And Tenzin Gyatso is at the heart of it, wielding his authority with a blend of humility and defiance. Let me take you into his vision, his bold declarations, and the profound implications of his choices, inviting you to reflect on what it means to lead with purpose in a fractured world. Tenzin Gyatso has always been a man of paradoxes, a monk who speaks to global audiences, a refugee who commands international respect, a spiritual leader who embraces science and dialogue. Born in 1935 in a small village in Amdo, Tibet, he was recognized at age 2 as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso. His life has been one of extraordinary challenges, fleeing Tibet in 1959 after China's invasion, establishing a government in exile in Dharamshala, India, and advocating for Tibetan autonomy while promoting universal compassion. Now, as he approaches the twilight of his life, he's turning his attention to the future, ensuring that the institution of the Dalai Lama remains a beacon of hope rather than a pawn in political games. On July 2, 2025, just days before his 90th birthday, the Dalai Lama made a historic statement through his private office, the Gaden Fodring Trust. Picture this moment, a press release from Dharamshala carried across the world, declaring that the trust, and only the trust, has the authority to identify and recognize his successor. This was no mere administrative announcement. It was a clarion call, a direct challenge to the Chinese government, which claims the right to control the selection process. I can almost feel the weight of those words, delivered with the calm resolve of a man who knows his time is limited, but whose vision extends beyond his lifetime. He's promised to leave detailed written instructions, likely to be finalized around his birthday, guiding the search for his reincarnation. These instructions aren't just a roadmap, they're a shield, protecting the spiritual integrity of the process from external interference. What makes this moment so compelling is the Dalai Lama's willingness to rethink tradition while staying true to its essence. He suggested that his reincarnation will likely occur in a free country, such as India, where he's lived in exile for over 6 decades, or among the 140,000 Tibetans scattered across the globe. This choice is a masterstroke, ensuring that the next Dalai Lama can grow up free from the Chinese government's reach, which has controlled Tibet since the 1950s. Imagine a child, perhaps born in a small town in Himachal Pradesh, India, or even in a Tibetan community in the United States or Switzerland, destined to carry the mantle of Avalokiteshvara. The Dalai Lama's insistence on a free birthplace is a statement of sovereignty, not just for Tibetans, but for the very soul of the institution. But Tenzin Gyatso goes further, challenging the very framework of reincarnation itself. He's floated the possibility of naming an adult successor during his lifetime, a radical departure from the tradition of finding a young child. Picture this. Instead of waiting for his death and searching for a newborn, the Dalai Lama could designate a grown individual, perhaps a trusted lama, or even a lay person, embodies the qualities of compassion and wisdom. This idea, known as emanation, allows a spiritual leader to appoint a successor while still alive, ensuring continuity and sidestepping the vulnerability of a child Dalai Lama under political pressure. I find this possibility electrifying. It's a bold reimagining of tradition, rooted in the practical need to protect the institution from manipulation. It makes me wonder, how do you balance honoring the past with adapting to the present in your own life? Another striking possibility he's raised is that the institution of the Dalai Lama might end altogether. In interviews over the years, he's said that if the Tibetan people decide the role is no longer needed, it could cease, allowing the spiritual lineage to evolve in new forms. This isn't a rejection of his legacy, but a testament to his selflessness. He's willing to let go of an institution that has defined his life if it serves the greater good. Yet in his most recent statements, he's reaffirmed his belief that the institution will continue, guided by the Gaden Fodring Trust and the will of the Tibetan people. This duality, openness to change and commitment to continuity, shows a man who trusts the wisdom of his community and the flow of history. The Dalai Lama's rejection of Chinese interference is perhaps the most critical aspect of his stance. China's government has insisted that it has the authority to approve the next Dalai Lama, citing historical precedents from the Qing dynasty, when the golden urn method was sometimes used to select high lamas. In this ritual, names of candidates were placed in a golden vessel, and one was drawn under the supervision of Chinese officials. The Dalai Lama has dismissed this as a tool of political control, pointing out that his own selection in 1937 bypassed the urn entirely. He's warned that any candidate chosen by China should be rejected by Tibetans and the global Buddhist community, predicting a potential dual Dalai Lama scenario: one chosen by his trust, rooted in spiritual authenticity, and another imposed by Beijing for political gain. The precedent is chilling. In 1995, when the Dalai Lama recognized 6-year-old Gidhan Shoki Nyima as the 11th Panchen Lama, China detained the boy and his family, who remain missing to this day, and appointed its own Pakan Lama, Galsin. Norbu, I can't help but feel a pang of urgency here, knowing that the Dalai Lama's foresight is a bulwark against a similar fate for his successor. Gyatso's statements are not just about logistics. They're a call to action for Tibetans and their supporters worldwide. He's rallying his people, both in Tibet and in exile, to safeguard the spiritual and cultural identity of the Dalai Lama's lineage. In Dharamshala, where the Tibetan government in exile operates, his words are a rallying cry, strengthening the resolve of a community that has faced decades of displacement. I imagine the young monks in the monasteries, the families in exile communities, and the global followers of his teachings all looking to his guidance, feeling both the weight of the challenge and the hope of his vision. His insistence on a free birthplace and a trusted selection process is a gift to them, a way to ensure that the next Dalai Lama can continue his work of spreading compassion without fear of oppression. What strikes me most about Tenzin Gyatso is his humanity. Despite his global stature, he remains approachable, often laughing at his own mortality and joking about his reincarnation. In one interview, he mused that he might return as a beautiful woman to surprise those expecting a traditional male Dalai Lama. This humor is disarming, but it's also strategic, disarming critics and reminding us that compassion transcends rigid expectations. His promise of written instructions, expected around July 6, 2025, feels like a final act of love, a roadmap to guide his people through uncertain times. I can almost see him, sitting in his modest home in Dharamshala, penning those words with care, knowing they'll shape the future long after he's gone. As you reflect on Tenzin Gyatso's role in this process, think about the courage it takes to plan for a future you won't see. His declarations are a testament to his belief in the power of truth and compassion to endure, even in the face of political might. He's not just shaping the selection of the next Dalai Lama. He's inviting you to consider how you can leave a legacy of integrity in your own life. What would you do if you knew your choices could ripple across generations? In the next section, I'll explore the geopolitical storm surrounding this process, where global powers and Tibetan aspirations collide. How does the Dalai Lama's vision inspire you to stand for what you believe in, even against overwhelming odds? 1. The geopolitical storm. A battle for the soul of the Dalai Lama's legacy. Picture a chessboard where every move carries the weight of centuries, where the pieces are not just kings and queens, but entire cultures, faiths and nations. The selection of the next Dalai Lama is far more than a spiritual quest. It's a geopolitical battleground where the aspirations of Tibetans collide with the ambitions of global powers. As I write this on July 6, 2025, the 90th birthday of Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, I'm struck by how his life rooted in compassion and nonviolence has become a focal point for one of the most contentious issues of our time: China's determination to control the reincarnation process, India's delicate balancing act, the United States' vocal support for Tibetan autonomy, and the Tibetan diaspora's fierce resolve all converge in this moment. Let me take you into the storm where faith meets politics and ask you to consider what happens when the sacred is caught in the crosshairs of power. At the heart of this geopolitical drama is China's unyielding claim to authority over the Dalai Lama's succession. Since its annexation of Tibet in the 1950s, the Chinese government has sought to tighten its grip on the region, viewing the Dalai Lama as a symbol of resistance to its rule. Beijing insists that it has the right to approve the next Dalai Lama, citing historical precedents from the Qing dynasty, when the golden urn method was occasionally used to select high lamas. Imagine a ceremonial vessel, gleaming with gold, into which names of candidates are placed, drawn under the watchful eye of Chinese officials. This ritual, which China claims as tradition, was used for some Dalai Lamas, possibly the 10th, 11th, and 12th, but not for Tenzin Gyatso, who was chosen through traditional Tibetan methods in 1937. To China, the golden urn is a tool of legitimacy, a way to assert that Tibetan Buddhism falls under its control, rebranded as a religion with Chinese characteristics. I find this chilling a sacred process reduced to a bureaucratic stamp of approval, designed to serve political ends rather than spiritual truth. The precedent for China's interference is stark and haunting. In 1995, when Tenzin Gyatso recognized 6-year-old Gedhon Choki Nyama as the 11th Panchen Lama, the second highest figure in Tibetan Buddhism, China swiftly detained the boy and his family. To this day, their whereabouts remain unknown, a mystery that hangs like a shadow over the Tibetan community. In his place, China appointed Galtsen Norbu, a figure raised under state supervision and often paraded as the official Panchen Lama. This act wasn't just a power grab. It was a calculated move to control the spiritual hierarchy of Tibetan Buddhism. Given the Panchen Lama's traditional role in recognizing the Dalai Lama's reincarnation, I can't help but feel a knot in my stomach thinking about this. Child, chosen for his spiritual significance, vanished to serve a government's agenda. It's a stark warning of what could happen with the next Dalai Lama, with experts predicting that China will attempt to appoint its own candidate, creating a rival to the one chosen by the Gaden Phadran Trust. The Dalai Lama's response to this threat is unequivocal. On July 2, 2025, he declared through his trust that only his designated process, rooted in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, will yield the true Dalai Lama. He's urged Tibetans and Buddhists worldwide to reject any candidate imposed by China, warning of a dual Dalai Lama scenario: one authentic, chosen through spiritual signs and visions, and another a political puppet, selected to legitimize China's control over Tibet. Imagine the chaos: two individuals claiming the title, one revered by Tibetans and the global Buddhist community, the other backed by the might of the Chinese state. This isn't just a hypothetical. It's a looming reality, with profound implications for Tibetan identity and religious freedom. I wonder how it would feel to be a Tibetan in exile, watching this unfold, torn between hope for a free Dalai Lama and fear of a state-orchestrated impostor. India, as the host of the Tibetan government in exile in Dharamshala, plays a pivotal role in this drama. Since Tenzin Gyatso fled to India in 1959, the country has provided a safe haven for him and roughly 70,000 Tibetans, fostering a vibrant exile community. The Dalai Lama has suggested that his reincarnation will likely occur in India, a free country where the spiritual process can unfold without interference. But this puts India in a delicate position, balancing its support for Tibetan autonomy with its need to manage relations with China, a powerful neighbor and economic partner. In July 2025, India's Minister of Minority Affairs, Kiran Rijiju, endorsed the Dalai Lama's stance, affirming that the succession is a religious matter to be decided by Tibetans. China responded with a warning about strained bilateral ties, a reminder of the diplomatic tightrope India walks. I can almost see the Indian government deliberating in New Delhi, weighing the moral imperative to support the Dalai Lama against the pragmatic need to avoid antagonizing Beijing. If the next Dalai Lama is found in India, perhaps in a Himalayan village in Ladakh or Arunachal Pradesh, India will face critical decisions about protecting the child and navigating international backlash. The United States adds another layer to this geopolitical puzzle. With its vocal support for Tibetan religious freedom, the U.S. has stated it will not recognize a Chinese-appointed Dalai Lama, aligning itself with the Tibetan exile community and the Dalai Lama's vision. This stance, rooted in policies like the Tibet Policy and Support Act, signals Washington's commitment to countering China's influence, but it also risks escalating tensions in an already fraught U.S.-China relationship. I imagine policymakers in Washington debating how far to push this issue, knowing that their support could embolden Tibetans, but also provoke Beijing's ire. It's a reminder that the Dalai Lama's succession isn't just a Tibetan concern, but a global one, touching on issues of human rights, religious freedom, and superpower rivalry. The Tibetan diaspora, spread across India, Nepal, the US, Canada, and Europe, is the heartbeat of this struggle. With about 140,000 Tibetans living in exile, their communities are fiercely protective of their spiritual and cultural heritage. In Dharamshala, the hub of the exile government, young Tibetans study their language and traditions, keeping the flame of their identity alive. I can picture them gathering in community centers, discussing the Dalai Lama's statements, their voices a mix of determination and anxiety. They know that the next Dalai Lama, if chosen in a free country, will carry their hopes for a future where Tibet's culture thrives, even in exile. Their rejection of a Chinese-appointed Dalai Lama is almost certain, but it comes with risks division, conflict, and the challenge of sustaining unity in the face of external pressure. Another intriguing player in this saga is Mongolia, a nation with deep historical ties to Tibetan Buddhism. The Jebsendamba Kutuk II, Mongolia's spiritual leader, shares a lineage with the Dalai Lama, and his role in recognizing the next reincarnation could add complexity. If the Dalai Lama is reborn in Mongolia, it could draw Ulaanbaatar into the geopolitical fray, forcing the country to navigate its own delicate relationship with China. I find this possibility fascinating, a reminder that the Dalai Lama's influence extends beyond Tibet, touching Buddhist communities across Asia, and beyond. The stakes of this geopolitical storm are immense. A Chinese-appointed Dalai Lama could undermine the spiritual authority of the institution, weaken Tibetan resistance, and legitimize Beijing's control over Tibet. Conversely, a Dalai Lama chosen by the Gaden Fodring Trust, likely in India, or another free country, would preserve the lineage's authenticity, but could deepen tensions with China, affecting global diplomacy. The dual Dalai Lama scenario would test the resilience of Tibetans and their supporters, forcing them to rally around the true successor while navigating a world where power often overshadows truth. I'm struck by the courage it takes for the Tibetan community to stand firm, knowing the odds they face. As you reflect on this geopolitical chessboard, consider the weight of a spiritual tradition caught in the currents of global power. The Dalai Lama's vision for a free and authentic succession is a call to protect something sacred in a world that often prioritizes control over compassion. It makes me think about the battles we all face, moments when we must defend what matters most against forces that seek to reshape it. In the next section, I'll explore the cultural and political implications of this process, diving into what the Dalai Lama's succession means for Tibetan identity and the global Buddhist community. What does this struggle inspire in you? How do you hold on to what's true when the world pushes back? 1. Cultural and political implications. The soul of Tibet and the global quest for meaning. You imagine standing in the bustling streets of Dharamshala, India, where prayer flags flutter in the Himalayan breeze, and the chants of monks drift from colorful monasteries. This is the heart of the Tibetan exile community, a place where the spirit of Tibet endures despite decades of displacement. The selection of the next Dalai Lama is not just a spiritual or political event. It's a defining moment for the cultural and political identity of Tibetans, both in exile and under Chinese rule, and for Buddhists worldwide who look to the Dalai Lama as a beacon of compassion. As I reflect on this process, I'm struck by its deeper meaning, a testament to resilience, a battle for cultural survival, and a universal call to protect what makes us human. Let me guide you through the cultural and political stakes of this succession, exploring how it shapes the future of Tibet, the global Buddhist community, and even your own understanding of identity and purpose. For Tibetans, the Dalai Lama is more than a spiritual leader. He's the living embodiment of their culture, history, and aspirations. Tibetan Buddhism, with its intricate rituals, vibrant art, and philosophy of compassion, is the backbone of their identity, binding together a people scattered across Tibet's high plateaus and exile communities in India, Nepal, and beyond. The Dalai Lama's role as the 14th in a lineage stretching back to the 14th century makes him a symbol of continuity, a thread connecting past, present, and future. When Tenzin Gyatso, the current Dalai Lama, passes, and the search for his reincarnation begins, it will be a moment of profound cultural significance. The process, guided by the Gaden Phodreng Trust, rooted in sacred signs and visions, will reaffirm the Tibetan belief in reincarnation, a cornerstone of their worldview that sees life as a cycle of renewal rather than a linear end. I can almost feel the anticipation in Tibetan homes, from Lhasa to Dharamshala, as families pray for a successor who will carry their heritage forward. The cultural stakes are heightened by the threat of Chinese interference. Since China's annexation of Tibet in the 1950s, the Tibetan language, religion, and traditions have faced systematic erosion. Monasteries have been destroyed or repurposed, religious practices restricted, and the Tibetan language sidelined in favor of Mandarin. The Dalai Lama, living in exile since 1959, has been a global advocate for preserving this culture, promoting Tibetan schools, cultural festivals, and Buddhist teachings worldwide. His successor will inherit this mantle, tasked with keeping Tibetan identity alive in a world where it's under siege. Imagine a young child, perhaps found in an Indian village or a Tibetan settlement in Switzerland, growing up to lead this charge. They'll learn the intricate Thangka paintings, the rhythmic chants of the Heart Sutra, and the stories of Tibet's past, all while navigating a global stage. I'm moved by the thought of this child, still unknown, destined to embody a culture that refuses to be erased. The political implications for Tibetans are equally profound. In Tibet, where roughly 6 million Tibetans live under Chinese control, the Dalai Lama is a symbol of resistance. Even if he advocates nonviolence and a middle-way approach seeking autonomy rather than independence, China's insistence on controlling the reincarnation process through the golden urn or state approval aims to install a Dalai Lama who aligns with Beijing's agenda, effectively neutralizing this symbol of resistance. A precedent of the Panchen Lama looms large. In 1995, China abducted the Dalai Lama's chosen Panchen Lama, Gedhun Chokyam, and appointed its own, Galtsen Norbu, to serve as a state-sanctioned figure. A Chinese-appointed Dalai Lama could be used to legitimize Beijing's rule, suppress Tibetan dissent, and weaken the exile community's political voice. I can't help but feel a surge of concern imagining this scenario. A figure claiming the title of Dalai Lama, but serving as a tool of control, a betrayal of everything Tenzin Gyatso stands for. The Tibetan diaspora, numbering about 140,000, is the vanguard of this cultural and political struggle. In Dharamshala, the Tibetan government in exile, led by elected officials like Penpat Tsering, operates as a democratic counterpoint to China's authoritarian rule. The selection of the next Dalai Lama will galvanize this community, reinforcing their commitment to preserve their heritage and advocate for Tibetan rights. If the reincarnation is found in a free country, as Tenzin Gyatso has predicted, it will strengthen the exile community's legitimacy, giving them a spiritual leader who can speak freely on the global stage. Picture a young Dalai Lama addressing the United Nations or meeting world leaders, as Tenzin Gyatso has done, carrying the Tibetan cause to new generations. But if China succeeds in appointing a rival Dalai Lama, it could sow division, forcing Tibetans to rally around the authentic successor while rejecting the impostor. I imagine the debates in exile communities, the protests in the streets of Delhi or New York, as Tibetans assert their right to define their own future. For the global Buddhist community, the Dalai Lama's succession carries immense weight. With millions of followers across Asia, Europe, and the Americas, Tibetan Buddhism has become a global force, thanks in large part to Tenzin Gyatso's teachings on compassion, mindfulness, and interfaith dialogue. His books, speeches, and public appearances have made him a spiritual icon, not just for Buddhists, but for anyone seeking meaning in a chaotic world. The next Dalai Lama will inherit this global role, tasked with continuing his message of universal compassion. Whether a child trained over decades or an adult chosen in Tenzin Gyatso's lifetime, this successor will need to navigate a world of diverse cultures, digital platforms, and global challenges like climate change and conflict. I can envision them speaking at a Buddhist conference in Thailand or a mindfulness retreat in California, their words echoing Tenzin Gyatso's call to alleviate suffering for all beings. The dual Dalai Lama scenario is perhaps the greatest threat to this cultural and political legacy. If China appoints its own candidate, it could fracture the global Buddhist community, with some governments or groups, particularly those aligned with Beijing, recognizing the state-backed figure. Tibetans and most Buddhists are likely to reject this candidate, rallying around the Gaden Phadring Trust's choice. But the division could weaken the institution's universal appeal. I think of the Catholic schism of the Middle Ages, with rival popes claiming legitimacy, and wonder how such a split would play out in the modern world, perhaps on social media, where hashtags and campaigns could amplify the conflict. The authentic Dalai Lama, chosen through traditional rituals, would carry the spiritual weight, but the political battle would test the resilience of Buddhists and their allies worldwide. Beyond Tibet and Buddhism, the succession process speaks to a universal struggle, the fight to preserve identity in the face of erasure. Tibetans are not alone in this. Think of indigenous peoples, minority cultures, or diaspora communities worldwide, all striving to protect their languages, traditions, and histories against dominant forces. The Dalai Lama's insistence on a free and authentic succession is a stand for cultural sovereignty, a reminder that no government can claim ownership over a people's soul. I'm inspired by this resilience, by the way Tibetans have built schools, preserved texts, and celebrated festivals in exile, keeping their culture alive against all odds. It makes me ask, what parts of your own identity, your heritage, you hold on to in the face of change or pressure? Politically, the succession will reverberate across the global stage. India, as the likely birthplace of the next Dalai Lama, will face pressure to protect the child and uphold the Tibetan cause, even as it navigates its relationship with China. The United States, with its support for Tibetan religious freedom, will likely champion the Gaden Phodrang Trust's candidate, potentially escalating tensions with Beijing. Smaller players, like Mongolia or Nepal, could also be drawn in, especially if the reincarnation is found in their borders. The process could spark protests, diplomatic disputes, or even sanctions, as nations take sides in this spiritual-political drama. I can almost hear the debates in international forums, the headlines flashing across screens, as the world grapples with the question of who gets to define the Dalai Lama's legacy. As you reflect on these cultural and political implications, consider what the Dalai Lama's succession means for you. It's a story of a people fighting to preserve their soul, of a spiritual tradition standing firm against political might, of a global community seeking meaning in a divided world. The next Dalai Lama, whether a child or an adult, will carry the hopes of millions, not just to lead Tibetan Buddhism, but to remind us all of the power of compassion, resilience, and identity. In the next section, I'll explore the potential outcomes of this process. What a future with one Dalai Lama, two Dalai Lamas, or no Dalai Lama at all might look like. How does this story inspire you to protect what matters most in your own life, whether it's your culture, your beliefs, or your sense of purpose? 1. Potential outcomes. Envisioning the future of the Dalai Lama's legacy, you picture a quiet monastery in Dharamshala, where candlelight flickers against ancient Thangka paintings, and the air hums with the low chant of monks praying for guidance. The selection of the next Dalai Lama is not just a process, but a pivotal moment that could redefine Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan identity, and the global quest for spiritual meaning. As I write this on July 6, 2025, the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, is preparing to leave written instructions for his succession, a final act of wisdom to guide his people through uncertain times. But the future is not singular. It branches into multiple possibilities, each with its own challenges and hopes. Will there be one Dalai Lama, chosen through sacred rituals and embraced by the world? Will a rival figure, backed by political power, split the spiritual landscape? Or could the institution itself evolve, or even end? Let me take you through these potential outcomes, inviting you to feel the weight of this moment and consider what it means for the future of compassion in our world. The most hopeful outcome, and the one Tenzin Gyatso is working tirelessly to ensure, is the selection of a single, authentic Dalai Lama through the traditional process led by the Gaden Phodrang Trust. Imagine a child, perhaps born in a Himalayan village in India, or a Tibetan exile community in Nepal, identified through sacred signs, visions at Lamo Latso, the Oracle Lake, or the direction of smoke from Tenzin Gyatso's cremation. The lamas, guided by his written instructions, find this child, who recognizes objects from the 14th Dalai Lama's life with an uncanny certainty, saying, "It's mine," just as Tenzin Gyatso did at age 2. This child is enthroned, trained in the monasteries of Dharamshala, and grows into a leader who carries forward the legacy of compassion, nonviolence, and global dialogue. In this scenario, the Tibetan exile community rallies around the new Dalai Lama, as do Buddhists worldwide. India, as the likely host country, provides protection, ensuring the child can grow up free from Chinese interference. The United States and other nations recognize this Dalai Lama, reinforcing the legitimacy of the Gaden Phodrang Trust's choice. The Tibetan diaspora, 140,000 strong, spread across India, Nepal, the US, and Europe, finds renewed purpose, their cultural and political aspirations embodied in a young leader who speaks their language and carries their hopes. I can picture this child, perhaps a girl, breaking tradition, addressing a global audience with the same warmth and wisdom as Tenzin Gyatso, her words bridging cultures and faiths. But this outcome is not without challenges. China will likely denounce the selection, branding the new Dalai Lama a separatist and refusing to recognize them. Inside Tibet, where 6 million Tibetans live under Chinese control, access to the authentic Dalai Lama may be restricted, with state media promoting a rival narrative. The exile community will need to work tirelessly to amplify their Dalai Lama's voice, using digital platforms, global advocacy, and cultural festivals to keep the lineage alive. I'm struck by the resilience this would require. Imagine Tibetan youth in Dharamshala organizing online campaigns, monks in exile monasteries teaching the new Dalai Lama's story, and Buddhists worldwide meditating on her message of compassion. This outcome would preserve the spiritual and cultural integrity of the institution, but it would demand unwavering commitment from Tibetans and their supporters to counter China's influence. A darker, yet increasingly likely, possibility is the emergence of two Dalai Lamas, one chosen by the Gaden Phadrung Trust, rooted in Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and another appointed by the Chinese government. Picture this: the trust identifies a child in a free country, perhaps India or Canada, through sacred rituals, while China conducts its own process in Tibet, using the golden urn under state supervision to select a candidate who aligns with Beijing's agenda. The result is a schism, with two figures claiming the title of the 15th Dalai Lama, each backed by different forces. This scenario, which Tenzin Gyatso has explicitly warned against, would be a profound test of faith, unity, and resilience for Tibetans and the global Buddhist community. The authentic Dalai Lama, chosen by the Trust, would likely be recognized by the Tibetan diaspora, most Buddhists, and nations like India and the United States. Based in a free country, this Dalai Lama could train in safety, speak freely, and continue Tenzin Gyatso's global mission of compassion and dialogue. But their influence inside Tibet would be limited, as China could block information about them, censoring their image and teachings. Meanwhile, the Chinese-appointed Dalai Lama, raised under state control, would be presented as the official figure, likely housed in Lhasa and paraded at state events to legitimize China's rule. I can't shake the image of this rival figure, perhaps a young boy groomed by Beijing, reciting government-approved messages, while Tibetans in exile mourn the loss of their true leader. The precedent for this scenario is chilling. In 1995, when Tenzin Gyatso recognized Gyaltsen Choki Nyima as the 11th Panchen Lama, China abducted the boy and his family, who remain missing, and appointed Gyaltsen Norbu as its own Panchen Lama. This dual Panchen Lama situation has weakened the Panchen Lama's spiritual authority, with most Tibetans rejecting China's candidate. A similar fate for the Dalai Lama could fracture the Tibetan community, forcing them to choose between loyalty to the authentic successor and the practical realities of living under Chinese rule, where dissent carries severe consequences. I imagine families in Tibet whispering about the true Dalai Lama in secret, while exile communities in Dharamshala or New York hold protests, their prayer flags a defiant symbol of resistance. Globally, this scenario would spark diplomatic tensions. India, if hosting the authentic Dalai Lama, would face pressure from China to suppress the exile community's activities, potentially straining bilateral relations. The U.S., with its commitment to Tibetan religious freedom, would likely champion the Trust's candidate, possibly leading to sanctions or counter-sanctions with China. Smaller nations like Nepal or Mongolia, with their own Buddhist populations, could be caught in the crossfire, forced to navigate their relations with both China and the Tibetan diaspora. The global Buddhist community would face a crisis of legitimacy, with some groups, particularly in countries aligned with China, potentially recognizing the state-backed Dalai Lama. I can see this playing out on social media, with hashtags like #TrueDalaiLama trending alongside Chinese propaganda, creating a digital battlefield for spiritual authority. Perhaps the most radical outcome is one Tenzin Gyatso himself has contemplated: the end of the Dalai Lama institution, or its transformation into something new. Over the years, he suggested that if the Tibetan people decide the role is no longer needed, the lineage could cease, allowing Tibetan Buddhism to evolve in new forms. Alternatively, he's proposed naming an adult successor during his lifetime, a process called emanation, to ensure continuity and avoid a vulnerable interregnum. Imagine Tenzin Gyatso in his final years designating a trusted lama or even a layperson, male or female, to take up the mantle. This adult Dalai Lama could step into the role immediately, bypassing decades of training and countering China's ability to exploit a child's vulnerability. The end of the institution would be a seismic shift. For centuries, the Dalai Lama has been the spiritual, and until 2011, political leader of Tibetans, guiding them through crises like the Chinese invasion and exile. Without a Dalai Lama, the Tibetan exile community would rely on its democratic institutions, like the government in exile, led by Pemba Tsering, to carry forward the political struggle. Spiritually, other high lamas, such as the Karmapa or the Gangmen Tripa, might fill the void, but the absence of the Dalai Lama's global charisma could weaken Tibetan visibility on the world stage. I picture Tibetan youth grappling with this change, some embracing the freedom to redefine their identity, others mourning the loss of a unifying figure. A transformed institution, with an adult successor, could be a bold reinvention. This Dalai Lama, already trained in Buddhist philosophy and worldly affairs, could continue Tenzin Gyatso's work without delay, addressing global issues like climate change, interfaith dialogue, and human rights. They might travel the world, as Tenzin Gyatso has, meeting leaders and inspiring millions, their authority rooted in the 14th Dalai Lama's blessing, rather than traditional reincarnation. But this break from tradition could spark debate among Tibetans, with some questioning whether an appointed successor carries the same spiritual weight as a reincarnated one. I can envision heated discussions in exile communities, monks debating in monastery courtyards, and Buddhists worldwide wrestling with the balance between tradition and innovation. Each of these outcomes, a single Dalai Lama, a dual Dalai Lama, or the end of the institution, carries profound implications for Tibetans, Buddhists, and the world. A single authentic Dalai Lama would preserve the lineage's spiritual purity, but it would require global support to counter China's influence. A dual Dalai Lama scenario would test the resilience of Tibetans and their allies, potentially dividing the Buddhist community, but also galvanizing resistance. The end or transformation of the institution would challenge Tibetans to redefine their identity, trusting in their collective strength to carry forward without a singular figurehead. I'm struck by the courage each path demands, the faith required to navigate an uncertain future. As you envision these possibilities, think about what they mean for you. The Dalai Lama's succession is a story of a people fighting to preserve their soul, of a spiritual tradition standing against political might, of a world grappling with questions of authenticity and power. Whether the next Dalai Lama is a child in India, an adult chosen by Tenzin Gyatso, or a symbol that evolves into something new, this moment asks us all to consider: how do we protect what's sacred in our lives? How do we stand for truth when the odds seem overwhelming? Tenzin Gyatso's legacy, built on compassion and resilience, invites you to find your own answers, to carry forward the light of hope in your own way.